So a very warm welcome to Tom, who's joining us from the Charity Commission. Tom is Head of Charities Engagement, and he's going to be providing over the next half hour an introduction to the Commission, set out some best practice when assessing risks when working internationally in particular, and to give a bit more information about what support is available to the Commission. So very pleased to have you here today, Tom, and over to you.
Great, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, yeah, so yeah, thanks very much for the intro, Janine. Just checking, do I have control of the slides, or should I ask you to just move things on?
You should do. I'm just going to double check. It seems to.
I think it gave control to me, Amber.
One second, let me just see if I can. I've made you co-host, Tom, so hopefully that's popped up on your screen.
No, not yet. I mean, I'm happy
next slide. Should we go old school? Next slide.
Yeah, is that all right? Yeah,
totally fine.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You'll need to do it, Amber. I don't have slide control.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks very much. Yeah, yeah. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Tom. As Janine said, I'm the Head of Charities Engagement at the Charity Commission. It's great to be here today. It's great to be part of the event. Thank you to Olivia and the rest of the team for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I thought I would just start by expressing my appreciation for all of the work that you do. You know, as the individuals running or supporting small charities working internationally, you know, you really do create a tangible difference in the world, often navigating difficult circumstances, bringing relief and support to communities. So I thought I would start by saying thank you to you all. Now, the aim today is to really give you an overview of the Commission, talk a bit about risk, some tools to kind of identify and manage risk when working overseas, and set out some of the types of support that the Commission can provide. Really happy to answer questions as we go on, because this is a really big topic. I could probably spend the whole day discussing it with you all. So if we just go to the next slide. So I'm going to absolutely shamelessly here start off with a plug for some of the events that the Commission runs for charities. These sorts of events will discuss issues like risk management in a lot more detail. So there's a couple of events that I thought I would flag up for you all specifically. The first is next week. We're running a webinar on holding, moving and receiving funds when working internationally, which you may find useful. And then kind of mid-July at the beginning of August, we're running in-person workshops aimed at charities working internationally, looking at risks, responsibilities and legal duties. So 2 of those held in London, 1 in Birmingham. Lunch is provided. There's still plenty of spaces available. Really good opportunity to meet me and the team, kind of ask questions in person. And you can book just by our book when site. So if you just Google Charity Commission International Events, it's the first link. So and I'll put a link in the notes afterwards. So the next slide, please. What I thought I would do is just kind of briefly delve into the background and the role of the Commission. So we are the independent regulator of charities in England and Wales only. We regulate and register charities, provide regulatory oversight, ensure that trustees comply with their legal duties, and look to maintain public trust and confidence in charities more generally. Now, the law relating to charities goes back a long way, to kind of the 1600s, but in the kind of 19th century and the Industrial Revolution, which saw the growth of kind of philanthropic organisations as we might know them today, kind of many of which kind of established during those times still exist, like the RNLI and Barnardo's. And that sort of time, kind of charity law was really kind of formulated and established in the Charitable Trust Acts of 1853, and then the various Charities Acts of 1960, 2011. Sorry, this is all quite geeky. Set out the kind of legal definition for charitable purposes, and established the regulatory bodies that oversee the sector, so the Charity Commission. They also introduced things like the requirement for public benefit. And those laws really provide a framework for the modern charity sector as we know it today. There's a kind of a list there of the kind of scope of our regulation. So we kind of maintain the public register of charities, give advice and guidance, and then we'll monitor and investigate where things go wrong. But we also publish, a lot of advice and guidance about charities, some of which I'll talk about today. So just the next slide, please. So we're independent, we're non-ministerial, we're a government department, but we're accountable to Parliament and the courts, not to government ministers. Our performance and our activity is subject to regular scrutiny, and we regularly publish reports about our work. And we can also be challenged through the Charity Tribunal and the High Court. The leadership of the Commission is also accountable to parliamentary committees, and all of this is just aimed at ensuring kind of a transparency, efficiency, and effectiveness in how we work. Next slide, please. While we regulate charities operating in England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own regulators and regulatory bodies. The Scottish Charity Regulator, or OSCA, and the Charity Commission for Northern Ireland. Regulation has been kind of devolved throughout the UK. Next slide, please. Now, what I thought we could do is just to kind of take a look at the size of the sector in England and Wales. So there's around 170,000 registered charities with the Commission, and an even greater number of charities that aren't registered because they kind of don't meet the income threshold, for example, to register with us. Now, the combined income of the registered sector is about 80 billion a year, and charities that would range from kind of small local organisations to kind of large multinational non-profits. And the scope and breadth of these organisations really reflects the diversity of the sector. But in general, charities all share that common goal, which is to make a positive difference in the world. Next slide, please. And this is just some kind of data about where charities operate globally by spend, in the kind of top 10 here. And as you'll see, it's often the areas of greatest need where charities will work. Next slide, please. And what I thought I would do, just to kind of focus that down onto small charities working overseas and the impact of charities, and I thought just to kind of highlight the incredible work that is being accomplished by charities, often run entirely by volunteers and working in remote or challenging environments. Your organisations might be small in size, but the impact you can have is often monumental. Being small does not mean being insignificant. And what I hope this kind of demonstrates, even charities with a small income, as we would define it, of below £100,000, there's a lot of overseas expenditure that happens. And my kind of view is it's small ripples creating significant waves. And the work you will all do together has often transformative effects. Now, next slide, please. So we'll move on to the kind of meat of the session, which is around charities and risk. I suppose the question is, should charities take risks? Now, the question of charities and risk is often complex. Effective risk management is crucial for the success and survival of any organisation, not just charities. And charities must take steps to protect their resources and their reputation and their beneficiaries. On the other hand, a certain level of risk is inherent in pursuing kind of ambitious goals and making a meaningful impact, and depending on what you do. And what's important is not to avoid risk altogether, but to manage it effectively. Understand the risks that you face, assess the potential impact, and develop strategies to mitigate those risks. That helps make informed decisions. Now, the Commission is a risk-based regulator, and we expect that of charities, expect a risk-based approach. You know, the greater the risk, often more effort will be required to manage that risk. Next slide, please. Now, as an international charity, there's often an additional layer of risk, you know, due to your operating environment. Operating in multiple jurisdictions, you know, can expose you to a broader range of hazards, you know, from countries subject to sanctions or embargoes, regions known to be vulnerable to levels of corruption or criminal activity, you know, conflict, weaker levels of regulation internationally, you know, even operating in areas where there are kind of prescribed or terrorist organisations. But that doesn't mean, again, that international work should be avoided. You know, the needs in those areas are often more acute, and the impact of successful interventions can be profound. But what it does underscore is the kind of importance of effective risk management in charities and for international charities. And by understanding and managing those risks, it can really help you kind of ensure the safety and effectiveness of your work. Next slide, please. Sorry, Amber, I think I'm going to mess you up now with my animations. Yeah, just go forward a couple. And we'll go to the next slide. So these are the 6 kind of key trustee duties that are set out in the Commission's guidance. And from our perspective, you know, trustees are the cornerstone of the effectiveness of the charitable sector and governance. You know, trustees are legally responsible for charities. That gives you, and I'm sure there'll be a number of trustees on the event, it gives you a number of legal duties, all set out in our guidance, the essential trustee. So just kind of very briefly, trustees must comply with a charity's governing document and the law. So a governing document is a legal document that you have to comply with. But then there are other laws that will apply to charities, so say on terrorism legislation, for example. You must be accountable. So, you know, do you know what your charity does? How does it do that? Act with reasonable care and skill. So if something goes wrong, take prompt action, take advice if you need to, operate for the public benefit and act in your charity's best interests. So make balanced decisions, adequately informed decisions, and manage your resources responsibly. Now, all these duties are aimed at helping trustees govern effectively and make effective decisions. And, you know, actively considering these duties can really help you manage risk effectively. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to flag up some of the other guidance that we have, which is the know your principles. So know your donor, know your beneficiaries, know your partner. This is again all set out in our guidance, and what we will expect is, again, a risk-based approach and a common sense approach. So, you know, we would expect charities to know their donors. That doesn't mean kind of every pound in a donation bucket, but, you know, donations that are significant or long term. You know, carry out due diligence on individuals to keep your charity safe. Similarly with beneficiaries, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean kind of if you manage a public space, knowing everyone who walks across it, but making sure that you help the right people for your charity. And then working with partners. So do you know your partner, which is a very common model for charities working internationally. Where there's less oversight of partners, there's more risk. And trustees are still ultimately responsible, even if you pass funds to a partner organisation. Next slide, please. And again, there's plenty of risks. If you just move forward a couple, Amber, and we'll get to there's many risks. You know, too many to cover in a single session. And there's some examples here. So it could be from political stability, kind of exchange rates, you know, a whole host of things, you know, climate change, legislation. And that brings us to the kind of first tool that you might want to use, which is a PESTLE analysis, which looks at kind of political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors. So this is a method of kind of assessing risk and the impact from external factors on your charity, particularly when working overseas. You know, using this sort of analysis tool can help you understand the bigger picture, you know, and prepare for those potential challenges. Next slide, please. But there are plenty of other tools available to assess risk, and you need to consider kind of what's appropriate for your charity. Now, the risk assessment cycle, again, is something that's set out in our guidance, but is a really useful tool to help you identify potential risks, kind of develop strategies to mitigate these risks, and then kind of regularly review and update your kind of assessments of what risks you're faced with. And then on the right hand side there's a risk matrix, which is a visual tool that you can use in that process. So that allows you to plot risks based on their likelihood and on their impact, really help you prioritize which risks are most important and which to address first. So kind of high likelihood, high impact risk, and then kind of low likelihood, high impact risks given priority over others. And that can really focus your mind on what risks you face. Going through that cycle using a matrix can really help you be proactive rather than reactive. Address risks before they become problems. An effective risk management isn't a one-time task, but really an ongoing process. And for those of you who are trustees, I would recommend kind of having a standing agenda item where you discuss risks, even if that kind of doesn't take up too much time. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, kind of another really useful tool, a risk register. So keep a risk register. It's a really valuable tool for how you manage risk. This is essentially a document that will list all of the potential risks faced by your charity, along with information about the likelihood, the impact, what you're doing about the risk, who's responsible for each risk. And a kind of well-maintained register can really provide a clear overview of the risk that you face, make it easier to manage those risks effectively. Make sure everyone understands the risks as well, which is often crucial. Again, this should be a living document. As new risks emerge, add them to your register. If risks change or are successfully managed, update that accordingly. Keep a record of what you do to manage risks. Next slide, please. Now, trustees of charities also have a duty to report serious incidents to the Commission. Now, our definition of this is an adverse event, whether actual or alleged, that results in or risks significant categories here. So harm to your charity, so those who come into contact with your charity, whether that's beneficiaries, staff, volunteers, loss of your money or assets, damage to property, or harm to your work or reputation. Now, significant in the kind of context of small charities can be different to those of larger organisations. Now, what we'd expect you to do is take into account your activities, your finances, your own reputation, and what may be significant to you may be different for others. So really, it's keep making sure that you have a kind of, again, a common sense approach to this. And there's a link there below for when you receive the slides to the reporting form. Next slide, please. Now, finally, I just thought I would just talk about some of the types of support that the Commission provides. So there's a wide range of guidance and resources to help you kind of fulfil your duties and operate effectively. Specific guidance, especially for charities working internationally, to address those kind of unique challenges. And the Commission, we want you to succeed. We want charities to be successful. So please do use these resources. The compliance toolkit that I've referenced a couple of times is very useful, because that has a number of kind of tools that you can use, kind of questionnaires and checklists that can really guide your thinking around how you manage risk. And alternatively, you can contact me and the rest of the team if you need advice. Next slide, please. There's plenty of other kind of support available from other organisations, including SIDCN, Bond, NCVO. Plus, the Commission does kind of shorter form guidance, like 5-minute guides, which you can kind of look at in your own time. Again, there's plenty of support and advice available for you to take a look at. Next slide, please. And then some more suggested reading and more avenues for support. Each of these pictures here, when you get the slides, if you click on it, that should just take you through to the kind of website. So A4ID can give kind of specific legal advice to charities, often pro bono. And and then kind of there's some other tools there as well, which you may find really useful. So please do have a look at those at your own leisure. Next slide, please. And then again, that kind of just a final slide, just to kind of reiterate, some of the events that we host, plus our email address if you want to kind of contact me and the rest of the team directly. Yeah, so please do have a look, and there's plenty kind of support around. Just to kind of sum up before I kind of go to any questions, managing risk is a really essential component of running an effective charity, and using risk tools like kind of risk assessments and risk registers, making use of all the resources that are available, all the support that's available, can really ensure that you continue to make a positive difference in the world. Thank you for all your time today. I'm conscious that I wanted to leave time for questions. It's a really big topic to kind of cover this in kind of half an hour or 20 minutes as I've just done it. But please do kind of ask any questions. I'll be here for kind of the next 10 minutes or so to ask any questions. Unfortunately, I can't join you for the rest of the day, but I really hope you found it useful. That's a kind of real whistle stop tour. But kind of happy to take any questions now if it's helpful.
Janine, do you want me to pick these up, or you're on mute?
Sorry, Amber, I've been busy live tweeting and finding links. If you're happy to, Amber, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you again, Tom. That's been really helpful. And as you said, it's a big topic in a short period of time. But one of the first questions that's come out, and just a big shout out to everybody else that if you want to add any more, please do. We have got I said about 9 minutes or so. What size of donation do you think should be investigated from an individual? 5,000, 10,000 question marks? Thank you, Julian, for that question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the answer really will depend on what is significant for you. Now, I know in our guidance, for example, we give an example of, say, a donation of £25,000, but that may be quite high for kind of smaller organisations. So really, it would be dependent on what you would see as significant. But there's also other things to bear in mind. If somebody kind of wanted to give you a donation and they placed a condition on that, so say, we want to donate this money to you, but it should go to an organisation that we specify, or you would kind of use that money to benefit someone who I specify, then you probably want to do some more investigation. It's keeping an open mind to kind of what types of things you're being asked to do, as well as the size of the donation and the profile of the donor. I hope that helps and that makes sense.
Thank you.
Sorry, Tom, would you put like a percentage figure on that for me? So if it's like 10% of your annual income, 5% of your annual income?
Look, I mean, I think your appetite for that will depend on you as an organisation. So I don't think I can necessarily be drawn on a kind of specific figure. For a kind of large international charity, 0.1% of their annual income might raise alarm bells. So really, you kind of need to consider that on a case-by-case basis. Now, if there is a donation that you're concerned about, please do write in, and we can kind of discuss it a little bit more to kind of talk about it. But really, I think as a group of trustees, what I would recommend is that you kind of come together as a group, maybe try to set that threshold yourself, or think about what really would be significant for you. Now, I think for me, if I was kind of operating a small charity and our income was, say, £10,000 a year, and we received a donation of £1,000, £2,000, I'd probably want to do some more investigation, but that would be just kind of me on a kind of personal level. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I've got a really good question for you, Tom. It's, how do we negotiate different standards of safeguarding child protection for reporting across different cultural norms? We are legally obliged to apply UK standards laws to international contexts.
Really interesting question and very difficult. As I'm sure you know, cultural norms are so different. Wherever you work. So it can be really difficult. My suggestion in the first instance is, where you've identified those risks, again, is to kind of capture those risks, make sure that you have thought of ways to kind of mitigate them, right? And I often think that, and I kind of came from the charity sector myself. I often think that charities really have a massive role in kind of developing safeguarding culture internationally. So while that means that you may partner with an organisation or work with it in a community where you kind of have identified risks, you've identified things that kind of that challenges, say, I would kind of think that often kind of charities have a role there in kind of increasing the capacity of these communities or their understanding of safeguarding. So I suppose I'm ducking the question slightly because it's really difficult to give you a kind of full answer, but just be mindful of what those risks are and how you manage them. Make sure you have those kind of conversations with the people that you work with, that they know this is your expectation, this is the legal framework that you have to work to, and often that can kind of help kind of drive that cultural shift. Does that help?
Thank you. Ellen, I don't know if you wanted to add any further to that. I have got a final question as well, just kind of popped in the last few minutes, but I'll ask this question, but if Ellen wants to jump in and ask anything or in addition to that, then I'll let her. But the next question is: pest analysis is once a year normally sufficient if not much changes? It is totally up to charity to determine, or does the Commission have suggested number of reviews? Appreciate it is quite a fluid question.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of deliberately quite kind of vague in how we would define that, because it really would depend on the kind of the context and where your charity works. So if, for example, if you were a charity working in, say, Sudan at the moment, I would expect that you'd be doing kind of that kind of revolving risk assessment kind of much more frequently than other places. So it really would be kind of dependent, and where you see the risks change, I would suggest you kind of look at it again. If you think that the risks are relatively low, kind of where you operate, I mean, once a year sounds kind of reasonable to me. But again, it would really be kind of dependent on how you work and where you operate.
Thank you. I think sorry, Janine, is that a question that's just come from live tweets?
No, I just posted. It was just a link to the live tweeting.
Okay, sorry.
And just a poll for participants on the group. If you think, as Tom said, there's a very, he's given a very quick run through of some of the essentials, but would you value a follow-up practical workshop to join colleagues and work through your risk framework and register? So add yours to the Twitter poll.
Thank you. One final question then, Tom, if that's okay, in the last couple of minutes. Some larger high street charities have let themselves down recently. Does the Charity Commission have enough teeth to bring about change? Would you like some more teeth, though?
Well, that's a loaded question, isn't it? Well, I think I don't think I'll kind of be drawn into kind of criticising kind of large charities or high street charities, but I think the kind of short answer is, the Commission has got a kind of number of regulatory powers that we can use to kind of secure compliance where charities don't do things how well, or don't comply with the legal duties. And I think there have been instances in recent years where we have investigated larger organisations, and those are kind of a matter of public record.
Okay, thank you. And I think I can kind of understand sometimes where this comes from as well, which is often just whilst we are 96% of the community, only get 20% of the income, but as I argue, probably have 80% of the impact. It's it can be a challenge because the public see the large, big, glossy brands, and that can then have quite, can have a detrimental impact on smalls. So yeah, I can totally understand where that comes from. Not an easy question to answer either, Tom. Right, I think we're coming to a close for this session, but just a big thank you, and just in the chat there, oh lovely, lots of thank yous and fantastics in the chat there, Tom, for your time. It is so much appreciated. It's our first event, so as Olivia said, and we're really pleased how quickly you responded to say yes, of course you'll support this event, and hopefully we'll see you at some future ones as well, and we'll make sure that we share those upcoming webinars and so forth as well with our members as well.
Thanks everyone, really nice to meet you all. Enjoy the rest of the day, yeah, hopefully
Thank you, Tom, that's brilliant. And next up, following hot on the heels of Tom, and for a linked topic, we've got a session from our sponsor, Chris Knott Insurance. We're joined here by Neil, who is the Managing Director of Chris Knott Insurance. They're an independent insurance broker established for over 30 years, established in 1983. Neil and the team have been helping small charities, including, I should say, the FSI, my organisation, PFP. I know Olivia uses them as well for Kids Club Kampala, and individuals across the UK to find tailored cover for their specific needs. As charity insurance specialists, they'll work closely with their clients in order to find the right cover at the right price so that you can focus on supporting your cause. So Chris is just going to be, Neil is going to be giving us just a short overview of some of the considerations for insurance for charities working internationally. So hand over to you, Neil and Amber.
Neil,
Oh, I can see you've spotlighted.
You should have access now, I hope. If not, just, next slide.
Oh, me, you mean? Right.
Yes.
Right. Hi, both, by the way. Good morning. Hello, everybody. Very warm welcome. And does that work? No. There's an arrow thing at the bottom left. I knew I'd fall at the first hurdle. Or shall I use my arrows?
There you go. Over to you,
amazing.
Neil.
Right. We're off. We're off and running. Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome along. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks so much to Amber, Janine, Olivia. It's great to be reacquainted after our days working with you with the FSI. So this is a fantastic opportunity for us. It's actually our 40th anniversary next month. So we've been doing this a long time, folks. I'm always very wary of terms like specialist and expert. There are lots of people who think they're those things, but I'm really confident that I know that our guys are technically extremely competent, and the important thing really is to get beneath the surface of what it is that you do as an organisation. I think that what we do is just as important as what you would expect from your lawyers or your accountants. Often all that happens, however, is that you just get a bill every year, and that's about as much as of an interaction that you might have with whoever's giving you the advice. So whatever comes, if you take one thing away from this today, it'll have been a good thing from my point of view. But the one thing I would really counsel you to do is to make sure you're getting advice and that you're confident that you've had the right discussions, given the complexities or otherwise of what it is that your organisation does. Just 4 slides from me. It's not a classroom session today, just really the things that over the long haul have been the most obvious things that have arisen from discussions with existing clients who are doing what you do. So some of it will hopefully be obvious to some of you. I hope it's not intended to be patronising, because we don't expect anybody to have any particular experience of what we do. If you don't come from a business background in a previous life, then you may never have had much to do with insurance or what it means. So these are just some things that we put together that for us are the most obvious. Yeah, if they create a bit of discussion internally for you, then that will have been a good thing. So mainly questions. I'll give some answers hopefully, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. But I think, for us, we couldn't do what we do with any conscience if we didn't know exactly what it is that you do. So it's really important to get to the bottom of exactly who you are, what you do, and for your insurers or advisors to recognise that. Now, one of my business partners has for many years been involved in a charity that was started by her uncle 30 plus years ago, working with kids who are wrestling with problems from parents who have AIDS. And probably at the beginning, they, like many organisations, started as just an organisation of people who wanted to help. They had the heart to want to help. And they probably did things that were, by modern standards, a bit sort of seat of the pants. Whereas now, like many of you probably, they are just a UK organisation that acts as a grant-making trust. There is a completely separate entity in Ecuador that has a completely separate trust board. And all that the UK people do is raise money and provide grants, and people go out there for purely the purpose of due diligence and oversight, and that's as much as the UK organisation does. However, some of what you do could be a lot different to that. You might be doing stuff that's very much more direct. You might be managing people in the territories where you operate, and that brings with it a whole load of other considerations. And some of this will apply even to what you do in the UK. The line there about subcontractors, freelancers, you know, how do you work with people, what it is that they do, who is seen to be the person who carries the can at the end of the day. And whether you know that you're leading a project or whether you're participating in somebody else's project or collaborating, it's so important to make sure that everybody recognises what their organisation's role is in all of that. And that sort of comment in italics, oh, it's no problem, we're covered by their insurance, that's something we hear quite regularly, not just in the third sector, but with other clients. And I think there's often a misconception that somebody else's insurance, if they lead a project, will cover you for what you do. Well, the reality is it probably won't. They'll be covered for a mistake that you make on their behalf if they lead the project, but that could leave you up a dark alley if you haven't made sufficient arrangements yourselves for your part in what that project is. So it's really so important to get that clear and to have that open discussion with whoever it is who's arranging your insurance program. And this is perhaps the biggest thing for us. We learned early on in our sort of, we had a big push 15-20 years ago when we bought a small book of business from a specialist firm that contained a number of faith clients who ran considerable charities. And what we discovered was happening is that not only were people in the UK involved in what was happening, but they were drafting in people that they knew they could rely on from around the world who contributed to the necessary work, the good work that the projects involved. So if these are not discussions or thoughts that you've already had, again, please make sure that you do, because I'll go on to a slide in a moment that just summarises the general picture as to what your UK policies will cover. But we discovered that we had people, one scenario I remember in particular, there was a guy based in Holland who was an expert in matters that related to projects in Southern Africa. And so this UK organisation was sending a Dutch national from Holland to Africa to work on behalf of the UK organisation. Well, that ain't going to be automatically covered. And so what might seem obvious, what might seem benign, won't necessarily work out that way, especially if you're doing or instigating any manual work. And even if you are just a grant-making trust in the UK, you know, you might take potential sponsors or donors out to the project from time to time. If you do that, who's organising that? Do you organise it yourselves? Do you hand it over to a tour operator? But even that, if you book the flights, you book the hotels, you could trigger a whole raft of legislation in the UK referred to as the package tour regulations, and you really don't want to trigger those regulations, and it won't be covered by your general insurances unless you've made specific provision for that. So, you know, there is a whole load of stuff that sits behind all of this, but really the message that I'll keep repeating is please make sure that you have a discussion about exactly what it is that you're doing with whoever it is who's responsible for making sure that your program your insurance program is fit for purpose. I'm not going to go on about the sort of other insurances that you can have. Obviously, for a lot of you, you'll have trustee indemnity cover, which is absolutely crucial. You might have professional indemnity cover if partly what you do is to give advice. But if we just take in at this stage, just look at the basic employers and public liability covers. The position generally in a UK policy is that it will cover things that happen here in the UK with your knowledge, authority and control. And the reason I make that comment is that we've had organisations in the past where we've been sitting in renewal meetings. One that I remember, I walked into a branch of B&Q here in Hastings, and lo and behold, there was a big stand for one of the charities that we looked after based in London. And I just happened to see that charity the next week and said, oh, I saw your stand at B&Q in Hastings. Long faces, nobody knew it was going on. Well, a stand in a shop is quite benign. I'm sure the insurer probably wouldn't have had a problem with that, but it just illustrated the point that things can go on without your even knowing they're going on. And for the reasons that we heard from the regulator, it's so important that your risk management process is on top of that sort of stuff. It sounds obvious, it probably is obvious to most of you, but it's so important to get that right. And then for anything that happens outside of the UK, your policy will almost certainly give you some cover for what they refer to as visits of a temporary nature, and visits undertaken by people who are themselves normally resident in the UK. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be UK nationals, but the assumption is that they are resident here for the time being at least, and that they are going out on your behalf from here. So using that scenario of the Dutch guy going from Holland to Africa, that would not be covered by the standard policy wording that most organisations are going to have. And on top of that, you've got all of the stuff around what is it that you're actually doing out there? Are you just visiting for due diligence and for oversight, or actually are you participating in some way in a physical process? So that of itself is a restriction, even if you don't realise it's there. So the important thing is that it prompts a discussion. And it's generally possible to widen the cover, but don't assume that by default it gives you all of the cover that you need, because honestly, it won't necessarily automatically give you that, even with the enlightened insurers who specialise in this sector. But they are going to have wordings that start from a base that gives you primarily what you'll need, but particularly in the context of overseas development, there are going to be limitations built into that. So that just adds further weight to that whole process of discussion. It's just about it, really. I'm not trying to frighten the life out of people. It's just that the reality is we still now, when we talk to a potential new client, we see sort of evidence of sort of lazy, poor practice elsewhere in our industry, where there just hasn't been an attempt to have the discussion and to flesh out exactly what happens. But the insurers in this sector are very willing and able to give cover that provides for most of what it is that most third sector organisations will be getting up to. They understand what it is that organisations do far more than some of even the large general insurers who don't specialise, and that they concede that themselves. If you don't do enough of this, then you won't really get to the bottom of what's most important for a given organisation. So they're there to support you. It is worth doing properly. I do genuinely believe, as I said at the beginning, that what we do should rank alongside lawyers and accountants' advice, but you need to get proper advice. So whoever you're dealing with, whatever you do, please pick up the phone after this session and make sure you're okay. That's me done, folks. That's unusually quick for me, Amber, isn't it?
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. That was really helpful. And I think, that piece for me, and certainly what I really valued when having a conversation with the team when we were looking for our insurance, was the fact that it was a conversation, that there was lots of sort of probing and really understanding and getting into the nuts and bolts of how we worked, how we engaged with partners, where the sort of understanding where the liabilities were, to make sure that we had the appropriate insurance as the UK-based charity, but also it sparked us to do some thinking and some working through with our partners to make sure that they were looking at what local insurance they were getting to be protected as well. So it was a hugely valuable experience. I'm just going to have a look at the chat and see if we've got any questions coming through. Just a comment from Julian to say that they've just employed a new employee in Tanzania, so the comment on insurance is hugely valuable, and he'll check the situation.
Good.
Opening it out, if people have got questions, just drop them into the chat.
I guess just a quick question, not as a question, but more about the process really, which is, you know, I've put the contact details there, Neil, but I think probably what's happened is that people will think, listening, thinking possibly, oh my gosh, I haven't even thought about this. Is it, you know, can I literally just pick up the phone, have a conversation around, okay, what could this look like, and then kind of go from there? So it's, you know, it's not a scary, it's not a scary process. It's just having a chat with someone who you know kind of understands where you're coming from and helps you to plan out what might be the best solution for you.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's no cost to that. You know, we do that sort of free review as just an automatic part of what we do. Obviously, we hope that we might then engage with an organisation, but yeah, please, you know, do talk to us. Our guys would be delighted to sort of run through this stuff with you, and yeah, if that leads to us looking at an alternative, then that's great. Sometimes the existing insurer is the right insurer, but you know, people sometimes say, okay, well, you deal with it instead of who's dealing with it at the moment. So look, yeah, we're here to have that conversation. We'd love to do that.
Neil, I have a quick question. I can't type it out, it's too difficult. We take students from the UK who have got cover with their school insurance. They work through a third-party travel organisation that manages them. Do I have any liability on the ground if something goes wrong?
Yes, because if they're going on your behalf, you have a duty of care to them, even though they might have the correct travel insurance provision. All of that's fine. The package tour thing is a very, very specific thing. But so if they're doing their own thing travel wise, that's not going to fall in your lap. But yes, if they're going to the project for whatever reason, and that's because you've been party to them going there, then yes, you'll have a duty of care. So, I mean, look, you have to be, an accident has to result in somebody proving that you as the organisation were legally liable, but that liability could exist in you know, in essence. So yes, absolutely, you need to make sure that your insurance program for public and/or employers' liability, because the employer liability will include volunteers. Yeah, make sure you have that conversation and that's taken care of. Do they do any sort of physical manual work when they're there?
They will be bricklaying and stuff, nothing above head height. There is a volunteer organisation that manages them and does all the risk assessments as well. So I've kind of distanced myself as far as I can from anything, but they are effectively at our schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what that means is that you're doing all the reasonable things that an insurer would expect of you in terms of risk management, risk assessment, and yes, to some perhaps to a large extent, if the worst happened, it would fall to them because they were managing it on the ground. But don't make that assumption. Have the conversation with your insurers and just say, look, this is what's happening, but this is how we're mitigating. And yeah, I'm sure that the right insurer would help you with that. They'll see that it's more of a contingent liability, but nonetheless, it's a liability there in principle.
Thank you. That's really kind.
No, pleasure. No problem.
Thank you for that question, Julian. Really helpful for others, I'm sure, as well. So, well, thank you, Neil, for joining us. We'll bring it to a close and take a comfort break, and we will be back at 11:30 for our next speaker.